Legendary journalist and UAP reporting rock star Ross Coulthart gave a presentation at the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies in the Rocket City, Huntsville, Alabama. That's fun to say. The home of disappearing anti-gravity researcher Dr. Ning Li. During this presentation, Coulthart made a number of really interesting statements, including he knows where the bodies are buried, he knows the names, he's brought the receipts, and he's ready to go public and spill the beans with everything he knows if anything should happen to him and he should mysteriously fall out of a window or get thrown under a bus or eat too much polonium or, I don't know, cross the street at the wrong time of day or take off in a helicopter that hasn't been properly maintained or an airplane that was made by Boeing. Too soon. Okay, we're going to take a look at this video and we're going to break it down. He says something else that's really amazing. He is now involved in a group called nhir.org. Here they are, funded by Dr. Anton Uvarov. And their goal is to privately fund research into UAPs and non-human intelligence through grants. And he turns this speech into basically a recruiting pitch to a room full of aerospace people to pitch them to come forward, spill the beans to him, and work on their passion projects. And that he's promising real money, serious money, to fund this research. Don't forget to like and share this video. And hey, if you're not already a subscriber, do me a favor, hit that button and subscribe, join Team Night Shift, and help me grow this channel. Because by growing this channel, I can approach new and exciting guests, and I can convince them to come here and talk to us about them. And that's going to help us figure out what the f is going on, because let's face it, it's getting crazy out there.
Hi, I'm Ross Coulthart. Welcome to Reality Check, here in America on assignment for News Nation. I've come here to Rocket City, Huntsville, Alabama, to the conference of the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs. They're a bunch of scientists who believe it is possible to investigate the phenomena of unidentified anomalous phenomena. And
Okay, freeze. Check it out. I'm about to rock you. This is an article from New Scientist magazine from 30 July 2002. The title of this article is Anti-Gravity Research on the Rise. Now, it's a short one. I'm going to read it to you. Stick with me. I'm going somewhere with this. Researchers around the world are opening, this is 2002. Researchers around the world are opening their minds to the possibility that the phenomenon of anti-gravity is not just science fiction. Most respected physicists still scoff at the idea that experimental equipment can reduce gravity, but several groups have been working on it independently and are coming to the same conclusion. It might just be true. On Monday, reports reemerged that Boeing, the American aircraft manufacturer, is interested in exploring the possibility of building an anti-gravity device. The news, first revealed in New Scientist magazine in January 2002, centers around Russian scientist Evgeny Podkletnov. Someone check me on that. In 1992, he claimed to be the first person to witness the reduction of gravity above a spinning superconducting disk. Hang in there. Stick with me. Podkletnov, a specialist in superconductors, says he stumbled on the effect whilst performing a routine test on a large superconductor in his laboratory at the Tampere, is that right? University of Technology, Finland. Part 2 of 3. Podkletnov met New Scientist in late 2001 to outline the experiment, in which a large yttrium barium copper oxide superconducting disk was suspended in nitrogen vapor and cooled to around negative 233 degrees C. The disk was levitated in a magnetic field and finally spun at speeds of up to 5,000 revolutions per minute by means of an alternating electric current. He claimed that objects placed above the disk lost around 1% of their weight, but so far no one has managed to successfully repeat his experiment. However, several high-profile organizations have taken an active interest in his work. NASA has paid superconductive components of Columbus, Ohio, $600,000 to reproduce the apparatus Podkeltnov used in his experiment. There have been delays, but NASA's Ron Coulthart told New Scientist, "We expect to be ready to test the device in late September 2002. British defense contractor BAE Systems is also interested in the work and set up Project Green Glow to explore the subject. Other groups in Japan, France, and Canada are also rumored to be working on the subject, though they have so far kept their identities secret." Here's the point. The most intriguing aspect is the affair. The most intriguing aspect of the affair is that Ning Lee, then at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, where Ross is giving this speech, says she independently predicted Podkletnov's observations in 1989. Lee's theory predicts that if a time-varying magnetic field were applied to a superconductor, charged and deformed lattice ions within the superconductor could absorb enormous amounts of energy. This would cause the lattice ions to spin rapidly about their equilibrium positions and create a minuscule gravitational field. Lee claimed that if these charged rotating lattice ions were aligned with each other by a strong magnetic field, the resulting change in local gravity would be measurable.
You want to produce AC gravity, you need three conditions. One, you must have the superconductor become the tools. Second, you must have the AC EM energy source to supply this source. Third, this energy must have the high frequency can follow up the nuclear motion.
Early in 2002, Raymond Chow, a respected physicist at the University of California at Berkeley, put forward his own theory relating gravity and superconductors. He predicted that bombarding a superconductor with electromagnetic waves would produce gravitational radiation and is now attempting to prove his theory by experimentation. That's the end of the article. The big key point here is Dr. Ning Lee, anti-gravity researcher in Huntsville, Alabama, where Ross is giving this speech on UAPs to the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. Dr. Ning Lee. Now, this article was written in 2002. That's 4 or 5 years before the first iPhone. That's when that was. Check this next article out. 2023, July 30th. Solving the mystery of Huntsville's brilliant anti-gravity scientist, Dr. Ning Lee, right there in the middle of this picture. That's right. Dr. Ning Lee predicted the anti-gravity effects of Podkletnov's experiment back in 1989 in her own work, and then she was able to apparently duplicate some of that work because in 1999, she disappears from Huntsville, Alabama without a trace, and rumor has it she was recruited to go to China to continue her work there. The reason I know this is because when this all happened, I was still a nerd, and I was geeking out about this whole story because at the time, it was really crazy. It gets even weirder. There's another researcher named Dr. Amy Eskridge, also from Huntsville, Alabama, where Ross is giving this speech. She ran an organization of anti-gravity researchers, and her father, apparently, according to rumor anyway, worked for NASA. And the interesting thing about Dr. Amy Eskridge is that she committed suicide mysteriously after giving an interview on a podcast, and she appeared to be intoxicated at the time. And then shortly after that, from all the accounts that I've been able to find, she blew her brains out.
I'm in Huntsville, Alabama. I know I've said that several times. We're the Rocket City. We're the biggest deal you've never heard of. Von Braun was here and we won the space race. We developed the Saturn V here. We built the Saturn V here. We won the space race here in Alabama, whether you've heard of it or not. And I can tell you for a fact, so many prototypes. Only prototype built like this in the world. You turn it on the first time, it works exactly like you thought it would the first time. Great data. You apply for more funding to test it more thoroughly, they cancel it. They cancel it. It goes to NASA divestment. It goes to the auction block. People bid on it. And literally scrap metal vendors win the bid and melt it down for scrap metal and sell it. We could be crazy, crazy, crazy far. We could be on the moons of Jupiter. We could be exploring Pluto that isn't even a planet anymore if we had spent money differently. I can tell you the names of so many NASA scientists that are depressed and they want to kill themselves because they have built prototype after prototype after prototype in Huntsville, Alabama. First in the world, never before seen, worked the first time you turned it on exactly like you thought. It was canceled and melted down for scrap metal.
So Dr. Ning Lee, anti-gravity scientist, Huntsville, Alabama, makes predictions. Those predictions turn out to be true. She actually gets some experimental results in the lab, disappears mysteriously. Dr. Amy Eskridge, head of an anti-gravity research organization, tells basically the story of what's going on in a weird interview, rambling on YouTube while she's kind of drunk, and then mysteriously commits suicide shortly thereafter. Ross Coulthart's there right now. The Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies is in Huntsville, Alabama, and Dr. Amy Eskridge, in her YouTube interview, says that Huntsville, Alabama is the number one, or if not the number one of the most highly targeted cities for foreign espionage anywhere in the United States. So very interesting. We're not even a minute into this Ross Coulthart thing, but just some quick facts on the history of this situation. There's a lot of anti-gravity research happening there, and not just recently, but for at least going back to 2002 or earlier. Crazy, right? All right. Back to you, Ross.
You're going to hear me present the keynote speech this year at their annual conference. What could possibly go wrong? Here goes.
Guaranteed there's a ton of spooks in this audience.
I want to thank you all and welcome you to Huntsville, Alabama. We got a great conference for you here over the next couple of days. And with that, I would like to now introduce our keynote speaker. I have a few words I'd like to say about this gentleman who has traveled a great distance from long far away to be here with us this evening. I think.
Also, real quick, does anyone else find it just a little weird that News Nation went all in and then doubled and tripled down on UFO UAP coverage? There's a case to be made that it's a growing niche market that is completely underserved, and maybe by just serving that market, if this all turns out to be true, which we have no reason to believe it won't, they're there first doing better journalism than everybody else. There's a logical case to be made there. But it's also just kind of weird that, like, who was News Nation before David Grush? Like, no, I don't know anyone who watched News Nation. I'd never heard of it before. And then suddenly when the UAP story broke and it started to go supernova, News Nation was there the whole time. And it's almost like they spun up this entire operation really quick. I know it was around before then, and I know I've looked into some of the history of it, but there's just, I don't know. Does anybody else find that a little weird? There's just some weirdness there. We'll come back to that.
Most of you probably who have seen him on News Nation, you know a little bit about Mr. Ross Coulthart. Ross is a multi-award-winning investigative journalist and author with over 3 decades of experience in newspapers and television, including reporting for Australia's Sydney Morning Herald newspaper, ABC TV's Four Corners, the 9 TV networks' Sunday program, and 60 Minutes. He currently works as a special correspondent for News Nation, but he also contributes to the Australian 7 TV network's Spotlight Public Affairs program. Trained as a lawyer, and you'll see that that's plainly evident here soon when he begins speaking, he's covered wars, investigated corruption, scandals, and public interest stories for over 35 years as one of Australia's top investigative journalists, and really now also an international one. Ross is a 5-time winner of Australia's top journalism prize, the Walkley Award, including the highest award, the Gold Walkley. among other awards that he has received. The list is too long to go through them all here. He's a best-selling author of 6 books, including In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. In June 2023, Ross also interviewed a gentleman by the name of David Grush on News Nation, someone, of course, a name that's probably familiar to most of us here. And he now hosts a regular segment on the UAP topic there on News Nation. Last but not least, Mr. Coulthart is also a gentleman I consider a colleague, and he's also a fellow member of the SCU. So please, without further ado, would you join me in welcoming Mr. Ross Coulthart?
That's interesting. I didn't know he was trained as an attorney. Also, one more thing on the Amy Eskridge story. When that happened, I watched her interview, and it was really bizarre and weird. It's very weird. I'll link to it in the show notes if anybody wants to check it out. But I know a number of people who started looking into it and then immediately dropped it because they basically said it was radioactive. And I think that's very strange. But she talks about in another presentation she gives at her organization, she talks about how many people in the audience are from the aerospace and intelligence world. And she was probably being surveilled the entire time. I don't know. But this is really interesting.
Thank you very much.
I imagine Ross is in a very similar room.
For having me here. It's an honour and frankly daunting to be invited as a journalist to speak to a room full of scientists. You know, I'm expecting to be thoroughly peer-reviewed and skewered by the lot of you. But I also want to pay a special recognition to the gathering of government, industry, defence, military, intelligence types who I'm sure are sort of back there in the background. One of the things that I think makes this event very special is that it does offer a portal, a respected portal for that discrete nexus between the government, private aerospace and the scientific community to talk about a topic that, despite overwhelming admissions from the US government, I mean, frankly, it's a lay down misère that it's real, whatever it is, there's a there. It's a subject that's still treated with such ridicule and stigma. And I think the great thing about SCU is it's an organisation that represents an attempt by science to deal with the subject objectively and rigorously and to give it solid, sceptical peer review. And that's what this should all be about.
Ross is such a credible guy and such a incredible journalist. See what I did there? But his resume is so amazing and impressive, and his accolades are just so outstanding that he's the guy you'd want to talk to if you were ready to blow the whistle and you needed to like get some stuff off your chest and vent to somebody. He's your dude, and he knows that. I'm sure his handlers and the people who he's working with know that. Mellon knows that. I mean, all these guys are intel guys. He's probably there to recruit some whistleblowers for all we know. And he's just using the speech as a cover. It's an interesting hypothesis. It's totally off the top of my head, but we're just spitballing here.
Now, as Micah acknowledged, as you would all know, I was involved in interviewing David Grush last year for the news network News Nation when he went public. And he tells me he was here in 2022, very discreetly, up the back. And if there's anybody here in the audience from the intelligence community who wants to tell me where the TR-3B Aurora is in that particular cave in Area 51, I'll be in the bar later. It is very, very daunting sticking your head up and speaking about the UAP issue.
That bar has to be Spook Central.
A hostile intolerance, a disdain in much of establishment science for the notion that the subject of UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena or aerospace phenomena, as Rich acknowledged, whether it should be taken seriously at all. My Aussie journalist mates and some more maliciously inclined folk took great delight in the fact that I was the unsolicited recipient of the 2023 Australian Skeptics Bent Fork Award for being supposedly the perpetrator of the most preposterous piece of pseudoscientific or paranormal piffle. And I'm proud of it. And
Good for you, Ross. And you know what? It's going to be hilarious when this thing finally does break loose and he's the fucking hero of this whole story. And people are going to look at their journalism careers as like there was a time before the alien thing happened and then there was a time after. And who was there? Who was on deck? Who was on the right side of history? Ross is going to be there. So I look forward to that day. He's a hero. It's pure balls to do what he's doing. There's no doubt about it. No question.
And this was all because the skeptics asserted dismissively I was claiming UFO conspiracies. Now, I want to deal with that in the course of today's address. Another lowbrow Australian newspaper tagged me as a UFO truther on the same basis. Just a wee hint there that I'm a UFO nutter. Both factuously smirking institutions made a very simple mistake. They didn't do any research at all before they made the criticism that many commentators have done on the UAP topic for decades. They defaulted to derision and ridicule on a subject that frankly no longer deserves that kind of treatment. There's a conga line of attention-seeking social media influencers and unhappy incels living in their mother's basement who spend their days trying to increase their likes and Reddit credits by attacking online anyone who takes this subject seriously. But I also think there's something more sinister going on, and this should be acknowledged. It's an official deception and manipulation going back decades. And establishment science, as well as the mainstream media and social media, have really no idea just how much they're being manipulated.
Go on. I've been saying this since the beginning. This is absolutely what's going on. And half the bullshit you see on Reddit is there to completely derail this whole conversation or steer it in a weird direction where it just runs in circles. Like you can see it if you if you step back far enough from it, it becomes pretty obvious. And like I think a lot of the tools and techniques that they've used in the past were pretty obvious now in hindsight, just like the way that it was ridiculed. But some of the new, more sophisticated stuff is relying heavily on AI to make these sort of conversational chatbot style confrontations. It's fucked up. It's a mess, and nobody really knows what's going on. But there's definitely some fuckery.
10 days ago, as many of you would know, Colonel Carl Nell, whose bio is formidable, ex-US Army Space Command, ex-Northrop Grumman, ex-Lockheed Martin, ex-Bell Labs, ex-multiple three-letter agencies, ex-deputy CTO for a $2 billion company, a former Reserve Army Brigade commander, a former senior advisor to the Vice Chief of the Army, a Deputy Chief of Staff to Combatant Command, the guy who advised Army Futures Command on the reorganisation of the Army Reserves, the biggest change since the 1970s. Formerly also with the Pentagon's UAP task force. He told a UAP investor crowd at the SALT conference, quote, "Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new and it's been ongoing. There are unelected people in the government that are well aware of that." And then he was asked by Alex Clokas, "How confident are you that this is true?" And quick as a flash, he was ready for that question. He said, "There is zero doubt."
Okay. Freeze. If Carl Nell, I just did a video on this the other day. If Carl Nell is talking to Wall Street hedge fund guys and like Wall Street investment bros, this thing is already over. It's just a matter of time. Like once Wall Street is involved, Wall Street is where all the real power is anyway. So whatever financial markets are going to be roiled by this thing, they've got to get their ducks in a row first. And if Carl Nell's there talking to them, that means this is definitely on their radar and they're thinking about it. And since they own all the members of Congress, or at least a lot of them, and a lot of government appointees come out of Wall Street, there's no doubt in my mind that something's right around the corner. If that's where we're at, like that's a canary in the coal mine, if you ask me.
And his comments that were then backed by a retired US Navy Rear Admiral, Tim Gallaudet. And he said, quote, "I know he's correct with complete certainty. Why has society not taken this world-changing reality seriously? Partly because of a deliberate and systematic disinformation campaign by the US government, which has perpetuated the stigma associated with UAP. Like Carl Nell, I'm privileged to know both men, Tim Gallaudet is an exemplary former US military officer and public servant. He commanded the US Navy's Special Warfare Center.
This speech presents like a recruitment drive, a whistleblower recruitment drive. Like he's pitching to this room full of people, his group, like, you can come talk to us. Look at who we have. I don't know. I have a feeling.
He was the superintendent of the US Naval Observatory. He served on the staff of the Chief of Naval Operations and eventually became the oceanographer for the Navy. In civilian life, he's been the acting Undersecretary of Commerce for the Oceans and Atmosphere and acting administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. Neither of these two well-respected individuals with many years of distinguished public service in our military are the kind of folk who recklessly propound conspiracy theories. So I think I'm in good company. And as they have done, I believe also that there is a non-human intelligence that's been engaging with this planet for a very long time. Implausible as it may seem, to many, on the evidence that I've been shown by first-hand witnesses, I've been independently apprised of sufficient evidence to reach the conclusion that there is, as confronting as I find myself saying this, there is a very high likelihood that the United States and other nations, particularly China and Russia, have recovered NHI technology, non-human technology, including craft and biologics. Yes, aliens. And there is an ongoing secret Cold War to harness reverse-engineered scientific advancements from that technology. Big call, but what Carl says, what Tim says, I totally agree with it.
Honestly, like, where else do you need to go to get the proof that you're looking for? When Carl Nell says this, when Tim Gallaudet says this, who would you trust more? Somebody with their credentials, with their military records, or pick any politician? Would it really matter to you if Donald Trump or Joe Biden was the one who came out and said it on a press conference and made it official? Air quotes on it. I'd rather hear it from Tim Gallaudet or Carl Nell, to be honest. Like, it means more coming from them anyway. I know all the politicians are full of shit. I know every presidential candidate is at least 90% full of shit. So it almost is irrelevant what they have to say. So by that metric, if you want to think about it in these terms, we're kind of done. We're kind of done here. We just need to see the shit.
And of course, the inevitable response from the critics, and it's understandable and quite reasonable to ask this question, is where's the evidence?
Fair.
On its face, asking for the public airing of evidence to back such an assertion about a secret UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program sounds perfectly reasonable, just as the scientific method demands empirical evidence to prove any hypothesis. We all want to see the data to back these extraordinary claims. We all want to know every bit of detail about this alleged secret program. Why is it secret? Who oversees it? Who knows about it? Does the president know? What crimes, if any, are being done in America's name without Congress being properly informed? Are there agreements? Is the Admiral Tom Wilson memo authentic? Did the boss of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works and two top Pentagon generals.
What was that? Did you hear that? Let's back that up. Somebody yelled something in the back. What are we, 11:43? Let's back it up.
Big call, but what Carl says, what Tim says, I totally agree with it. And of course, the inevitable response from the critics, and it's understandable and quite reasonable to ask this question, is where's the evidence? On its face, asking for the public airing of evidence to back such an assertion about a secret UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program sounds perfectly reasonable, just as the scientific method demands empirical evidence to prove any hypothesis. We all want to see the data to back these extraordinary claims. We all want to know every bit of detail about this alleged secret program. Why is it secret? Who oversees it? Who knows about it? Does the president know? What crimes, if any, are being done in America's name without Congress being properly informed? Are there agreements? Is the Admiral Tom Wilson memo authentic? Did the boss of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works and two top Pentagon generals really tell Tom DeLonge, the rock star, it was the Cold War and we found a life form? I find that an incredible story. And the amazing thing is that whole saga is revealed in a WikiLeaks leak. Emails from a White House staffer recording the fact that senior Pentagon generals were having a conversation with a rock star prior to the Trump-Clinton election campaign discussing the possibility of disclosure.
Does anybody else feel like you're in an alternate timeline? I feel like something must have happened a few years ago, like right around 2012. And I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like I'm in a movie now. Like it just feels like we're in a movie. What he just said is so out there. It's impossible for the average person to believe that that could all be real. And yet, everywhere you look, all of the people telling you that it's real are exceptional people. There's like there's not a single one where it's like, oh, he's completely full of shit. These claims are astonishing. It feels like we're in a science fiction movie. It really, really does.
That's irrefutable evidence that requires investigation. And that's all I'm saying, I feel as a journalist, I'm obliged to do, to investigate it. If this is all true, it's indubitably a very cleverly kept secret. And as the gatekeepers well know, so much of that evidence, that data, is locked up in highly classified programs. Most of the people overseeing those programs, I know, have no idea what's behind it. And the best trick of all, until recently, has been the way we've allowed ourselves to be so brilliantly deceived. The novelist Margaret Atwood once wrote, "The best way of keeping a secret is to pretend that there isn't one." And that's what I suspect unelected officials chose to do with what we will call, euphemistically, the program. They very deviously convinced opinion leaders in politics and the media and their shills on social media for years that there is no secret, that everyone's come forward and deluded themselves, or that they're lying, that they've dreamt up a cock and bull story about recovered alien technology, and for reasons best known to themselves, they're destroying their reputations by coming up and promoting a wacky conspiracy theory. Believe me, this is not good for your career. But clearly, the insiders advocating disclosure know something. They're not legally allowed to tell us about it. And even if they want to, they can't. And what most of the commentators also fail to understand is that it's not the general public that has to be convinced. The American public, frankly, at the moment, is mostly irrelevant in this ongoing debate, except for the fact that you all vote. What matters most right now is that members of key oversight committees in Congress and the President and his National Security Committee wake up to the fact that this is real. It's a major public interest issue of concern, and they start doing the job that we entrust them to do. That's the only forum where the full story of the program can legally be investigated and exposed. And that is starting to happen. As we all know, there's a new attempt that's just come out in the last day for a new UAP disclosure bill. It's so important. So much of the evidence that would finally make Congress finally wake up to what's been going on is highly classified. It can't be discussed publicly by those who've been read into it. It's a very, very clever catch-22. What do people want Cal Nell to do when they demand that he publicly reveal his evidence?
By the way, if there is a Cold War going on, which I fully believe there is, between the Russians, the US, and the Chinese to reverse engineer UAP technology, and considering how powerful that technology is, that it's basically like game over, first strike technology. First strike, one strike, game over. Isn't there tremendous incentive for the first person or the first group? I'm not a game theory expert, but the first group that gets their hands on this technology and is able to like successfully weaponize it, isn't there a first mover incentive for them to attack and dominate their other rivals? Like, wouldn't that be the first thing you'd want to do to lock down the situation before anybody can catch up to where you're at? Could that have something to do with this accelerated disclosure timeline that we're feeling the push towards? I don't know.
He'd risk a prison term
But it's
for
interesting.
revealing the classified details of what I'm absolutely certain he knows, if it's all true, of course. If it's all true, it's probably the biggest secret in human history. Clearly, Colonel Nell knows a lot more than he's letting on. And as David Grush has explained, most of this program is hidden inside what are called waived, unacknowledged special access programs, WUSAPs. And they're funded by black budgets that are meant to be funding other defence projects. That's why David's pointing out that this is illegal. It's a
Also, isn't it true that some of these programs are funded through illegal means? Like, didn't the CIA get caught red-handed selling or distributing crack cocaine in the 80s in Los Angeles? Wasn't that the whole thing? The whole crack epidemic was actually facilitated by a lot of CIA stuff. There's a great clip of Mike Rupert, who is a former LAPD cop who confronted the then CIA director on a national talk show at the time and like busted him live on air for this. And I don't remember the details exactly of who it was, but I'll see if I can find the clip and insert it into this thing. But yeah, like off the books money that's not traceable that comes through some illegal means, probably, a bunch of different ways used to fund these programs. So a lot of this stuff, even if you did do an audit, you probably would never find it to begin with, just because of where it's coming from. I don't know. I'm no expert on this stuff, but I read a lot of Tom Clancy.
breach of the accountability rules in Congress. Now, remember last year, the Pentagon failed to properly account for an astonishing 63% of its $3.8 trillion of assets.
That's why they always need more.
$2.4
losing it.
trillion of the public money spent on defence assets is unable to be accounted for because, according to the Government Accountability Office, quote, auditors were unable to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence to provide a basis for an audit opinion.
So the next time they tell you we can't afford universal health care, you can tell them to shove that right up their ass. The next time they tell you they can't afford to give everybody universal free college education in this country, you can tell them to shove that right up their ass. It's not true. We've always had enough money. We've always had enough money. We've always had enough money to clean up these Superfund sites, to fix the lead pipes in all these old buildings, to retrofit all of our old stuff. We could be living in a technology paradise right now if we really wanted to be, if we actually focused our resources in the places that matter. But instead, you've got the Pentagon just flushing trillions of dollars down some tube to go to God knows what. Now, if this ever benefits us, all right, we'll see. But I need to see something before I'm going to be okay with it. At this stage, it's just endlessly frustrating to hear how cash-strapped our government always is when every single year they increase defense spending without fail, and not by a little, but by tens of billions of dollars. And then they turn right back around and they're like, sorry, can't help you. Don't know. Got to raise your taxes, though.
This has been an issue for GAO since 1981. And yet for most of the media,
That's why
it's
we're
a
here.
big yawn. Hardly worth the story. If Congress just started asking questions about why the Pentagon can't balance its ledger, the secret would break wide open. What Carl, Tim Gallaudet, and the other high-profile commentators on the UAP issue, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, Jim Lukatsky, Colm Kelleher, Kit Green, Jay Stratton, and David Grush, what they're all constrained by, and the gatekeepers of this secret know this all too well, what they're all constrained by is the national security oaths they swore to protect. If what they say is true, then the irony is excessive government secrecy is being improperly exploited by the gatekeepers of this secret to conceal a national scandal from...
Wouldn't that make those somebody check me on this, but isn't that basically an unlawful order? And aren't you not obligated to follow an unlawful order? So if or maybe that's what the whistleblower provisions are for, to protect whistleblowers in that case. But it just seems like some of these things, this is a Danny Sheehan question, but would be unenforceable because they were based on things that weren't legal in the first place. I'm no lawyer, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
The Congress and the American public. These former defence and intelligence community insider commentators speaking out for UAP transparency, for your right to know, they're patriots. They think it's wrong that, as I've heard from one haughty, very senior aerospace executive on one occasion, so that some of the people guarding this secret disdainfully refer to the president, for heaven's sake, as a temporary employee. That's the attitude. They assert he or she has no right to know. At the heart of David Grush's allegations is the incredible claim that things are being done in America's name in collusion with private corporations with taxpayer money that may in fact be gravely immoral, illegal, perhaps criminal, with flagrant disregard for accountability to Congress, in fact, deliberate evasion. There are allegations here that must be fully investigated.
To be fair, though, I don't know of a corporate entity that hasn't walked all over the federal government. I mean, they could honestly care less. And that's true for everybody from Google to Meta to everybody in between, Bezos. Since when has Congress practiced proper oversight of corporate America? So it's just the defense thing is just a larger version of all that, but that's true across government for everything.
The people pushing for UAP transparency respect the notion in Article 1, Section 1 of the US Constitution. I warn you, I'm a lawyer. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. 232 years ago, in 1792, a Major General, Arthur St. Clair, led an incredibly disastrous expedition into the Northwest Territories in which 700 federal soldiers were slaughtered by a confederacy of Native Americans. A special investigation was established, and that congressional inquiry created an extremely important legal precedent. It enshrined in law the idea that Congress does have the power to inquire into executive power. Before that time, it hadn't been realised that the Congress, which essentially makes laws, also has the right to inquire that the executive in government heeds those laws, obeys those laws. This oversight is at the heart of your Constitution. I studied to be a lawyer before I became a journalist, and I think the US Constitution is a thing of beauty. It enshrines rights that in my country, Australia, as in many English-influenced parliaments, they're not codified at all. Rights such as your incredibly beautiful First Amendment constraint that Congress, quote, shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. My Australian Constitution does not explicitly protect free speech or freedom of the press. It's just implied very, very weakly in case law. I suspect that under English law, well, Colonel Carl Nell and Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo, they'd be in the Tower of London by now, and the Lord High Executioner would have chopped off David Grush's head. About 8 years ago, I started thinking about writing a new book. Books are a bit like babies. You only start thinking about writing another one when you've forgotten the pain of the last one. I've had a very interesting career so far in public affairs TV, investigative journalism and broadsheet newspapers, and I started thinking about what was the subject that was the one that everybody told you shouldn't look at, the most stigmatised, the most taboo, but also the one that had the most obvious leads for investigation. And that story, of course, was UFOs, unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Richard Dolan says the same thing or something very similar. And he said that in many interviews, he said that he, as a historian, looked into UFOs, the lore around the UFO world. And he was interested in it from the standpoint of a historian looking at the history of the cover-up and the secrecy. But as he started to investigate it more and more, he realized that the cover-up was actually real and it was totally covering up something real. And that's how Dolan got into it. It's also one of the reasons why I really like Richard Dolan's analysis on everything. I feel like he's got a historical context that each thing goes into. So when if he's asked a specific question about a particular thing, it's not just like he only examines that. He sees it in the proper perspective along with everything else, and then is able to give a more well-rounded analysis. It's also why I really like Ross Coulthart, because I think he has an opportunity. One, as a lawyer, he has an analytical style that is based in a rigorous journalistic discipline and an ability to sniff out bullshit. He knows what questions to ask and how to ask them, and he talks to a lot of people. So because he's talking to so many people, even if he's not coming right out and telling you directly what these people are saying, when he says, I strongly believe this to be true, it means he's talked to 30 different people who've all kind of told him the same thing. And he's smart enough to know when he's being misled or if he's being misled. So I think, in terms of people you should be looking at, Ross is just a phenomenal source for maybe not in detail specifics of individual aspects of what's going on, but from a broad view, the 30,000-foot view of just generally what's probably true, Ross is your man. No question.
UAPs, as we call them now. There is no story more stigmatised in journalism. If it's covered at all, it's treated with ridicule and contempt. And I could never understand why, frankly. Yes, there are some mentally ill people who are drawn to this subject, but it's always struck me how so many UAP sightings witnesses that I meet are credible, often highly intelligent people describing something anomalous that baffled and sometimes even scared them. Numerous times in the last few decades, in my career, I've taken calls from people, first-hand witnesses, telling me they've seen UFOs, UAPs. Many claimed to have seen intelligently controlled craft, clearly not human technology. And I have to admit, I treated them with ridicule, dismissiveness and stigma. I remember very early in my career, there was a woman who rang the news desk of the newspaper I was working for, and she said she'd seen a UFO while she was hanging out her washing on her washing line, and she'd run inside, grabbed her film camera and taken 3 shots and she said she still had the film in the camera. And so I said, oh, that's interesting. Bring it in. And so the photographic editor developed the film straight out of the camera as we all waited outside. And out he came with this huge big blow-up of a metallic disc hovering over this woman's washing line. And I freely admit I was a young buck in the newspaper and I was very excited, and I took it to my editor later in the day and I said, look at this, we've got a great story. And he scoffed and he said, Roscoe, we don't do stories about UFOs. And I said, why not? And he said, they're nonsense. And for days afterwards, I was doing little tinfoil hats on my desk, and you learned very quickly as a journalist, you don't cover this subject. And frankly, I found it perplexing because I'd found the woman credible. And time again in my career, I was given very clear indications that, contrary to that perception, this was something real. I was doing a story for an Australian...
I wonder to what extent editorial boards or newsrooms or news editors were straight up instructed by ownership and upper management to actively avoid discussing this topic, or if it was more just like pressure on every level all the way down to just avoid it because it was silly. It's really hard to imagine any other topic that is so obvious. Like if you saw a strange Russian military craft outside your house while you're hanging up the laundry, and that's not a huge story, that would be really weird. But I don't know. I think it was Anderson Cooper, wasn't it Anderson Cooper, who was planning on joining the CIA before he became a news anchor or before he became a journalist and started working for CNN. Isn't that weird? Maybe he did join. Maybe he never left.
Public broadcaster on the Royal Australian Air Force, and I was with some very, very senior officers at the end of a day's filming. And after the second beer, one of them leaned across the table and said, why don't you chaps do stories about UFOs? And quick as a flash, I came back and I said, oh, because they're nonsense. And he said, no, they're not. And in the course of an evening, he was calling pilots across from all over the room in this officers' mess at an airbase and saying, tell them what you saw. And they're going, you sure, boss? And he goes, yeah, tell them. And all these pilots had seen these weird objects, and they were talking about them, and they were thrilled, almost relieved that they could talk to somebody like me about it. But would anybody go public about it and talk about it? No way. There was so much stigma. So I set out investigating UFOs, and one of the first things I did 8 years ago was read Nick Cook's excellent book, which I all commend to you, The Hunt for Zero Point, which frankly is the definitive beginning for me on the search and the explanation for what really lies behind this mystery. He's a respected aerospace journalist, Nick, and he began similar investigations to mine about a quarter of a century ago, with the premise that around 1956, a group of scientists and a group of aerospace engineers had started talking very openly in the popular press about anti-gravity, propulsion, and how it would soon become a reality. The G engines are coming, we were told. And those articles referenced the Glenn L. Martin Aircraft Corporation, Bell Aircraft, Lear Aircraft, and as Nick wrote, several other American aircraft.
Lear Aircraft. The guy, Lear, whose son is John Lear, UFO researcher, guy who went on George Knapp's program back in the late 80s, 88 or 89, and said a ton of crazy stuff about what's going on with the cover-up with the alien situation here on Earth in Area 51. And apparently Lear flew for the CIA and had a ton of contacts in and around the intelligence world. So no telling how much of that was accurate or misleading or designed to be misleading, but interesting that there's a connection from Lear Corporation all the way down to the UFO, George Knapp, John Lear connection.
Aircraft manufacturers who would not spend millions of dollars, as they were, on researching science fiction. There was also mention of an elusive George S. Trimble, who was the head of advanced programs and vice president in charge of the G project at Lockheed Martin, which was at the time Martin Aircraft, but it later became Lockheed Martin. Back then, Trimble led Martin Aircraft's RIAS, the Research Institute for Advanced Studies, the predecessor to what became Skunk Works. And it was also clear Trimble had a background in highly classified advanced physics concepts. And Nick, to his enormous credit, pieced together that Trimble had put together a team in 1957 researching anti-gravity. And yet 2 years later, all these stories started appearing in the popular press where Trimble was making the extraordinary claim that the conquest of gravity, quote, could be done in about the time it took to build the first atom bomb. Now, there were also fascinating early references around this time in academic journals to electrogravitics research, tantalising suggestions from excited scientists that developments were underway in secret that had profound implications for the human race. Respectable scientific journals were referencing the work of Thomas Townsend Brown, claiming that in experiments which had been peer-reviewed, he'd achieved anti-gravitic effects cutting weights by as much as 30%.
There was just a guy a few weeks ago. I did a video on Dr. Bueller from he was NASA's, or is still currently, as I understand, as right now NASA's chief subject matter expert in static discharge, I think it was, and he developed a device that is capable of creating one. They just achieved 1 G of lift. There's a reason why it's measured in G's and not in force. It's in the video. He talks about it, but this is a guy whose entire team is built out of like former NASA guys, NASA people, and he himself is a NASA expert on static discharge. He's worked on James Webb Space Telescope, the Hubble Space Station. I mean, this is not a nobody, and this just happened a few over the course of the last 12 months. And in that video, they show a chart of his research team's progress in getting their system optimized and how much lift they're able to achieve. But they basically create a device that creates lift out of electricity. So, and it's apparently capable of lifting its own weight, from what I understand. So, I'll link to that video in the show notes. Worth a look.
And one very interesting aspect of T.T. Brown's work was that when he'd arrived at the best shape for an anti-gravitic craft, intriguingly, it was disc-shaped. Yet that supposed scientific breakthrough didn't happen. It's never happened. And if you allow 5 years or so for an equivalent program to the atomic program, it should have happened in the early 1960s. And so Nick's book had left us with the tantalising probability that there'd been sometime in the mid-50s a breakthrough in anti-gravity propulsion that was quickly suppressed by the military or by the government. For a very brief moment, scientists had talked openly about it and freely about the dawn of a new age, huge implications for mankind, and then bang, the door closed, and everybody shut up about it. My dilemma as an investigative journalist was that, assuming such a secret program existed, how on earth could I possibly track down these scientists, private aerospace workers, military and intelligence officials who might be involved in such a program? And moreover, how could I make them receptive to a quiet chat? And how could I protect them as sources if they chose to speak to me? And I was only too aware of just how totally compromised modern communications are. I was involved in Australia in breaking a world exclusive story about the existence of a communications spying system called Echelon, where under the UKUSA agreement, the UK-USA agreement, in which Australia, the UK, the USA, New Zealand and Canada participate. There'd been a secret code-breaking agreement since the Second World War, but that had also morphed into a communications spying system, where quite literally we were tapping not only the undersea cables, we were also intercepting satellites and listening in randomly to communications and sifting through billions and billions of communications all over the world with this sophisticated computer system that could pick up not only words but even accents. And that revelation shocked me, that how wide open modern communications are.
I could be completely wrong on this, but I seem to remember something about with Echelon. There was some kind of a deal where, like, we can't spy domestically on our own people, but the UK can. And we can spy on the UK's people, and we can just trade back and forth. There was some kind of a weird loophole. I remember, maybe I'm conflating this with something else, but some kind of weird loophole where there was like an agreement between countries that if they spied on our people and just told us what we needed to know, that it would be okay, and we could spy on their people and tell them what they need to know. And that was the information sharing agreement. Or I'm full of shit and I have no idea what I'm talking about, but I seem to remember something along those lines. If anybody knows, let me know.
More recently, I did a story for Australian 60 Minutes about a breach in mobile phone security that still exists called SS7, Signalling System 7. The story was eventually run on CBS 60 Minutes here in America. And what that revealed is that there's essentially a hack built into mobile phones that allows anyone with knowledge of this hack to listen in to any call. And we demonstrated it on national television. So how could I communicate with these people without compromising them? I reached the conclusion that the only way to do it safely was to find out who they are and where they lived and write them a letter. And that's what I did. I wrote 160 plus letters and mailed them, and it took months, but I waited. So to figure out who I was writing to, what I did was I read, listened and watched pretty much everything I could that referenced this purported dark secret history of anti-gravity. I combed esoteric scientific papers for key words, and I looked who were the military R&D geeks, which companies won the most interesting looking contracts, who studied advanced physics at universities, reputable universities, and then disappeared. And some of the same names started appearing. I just treated it like any other investigation, not necessarily with the assumption that this program existed, but if it did exist, how would I find these people? And once I'd compiled an open source list of those scientists and commentators and anybody else who I thought might be useful, I got the list going and started writing letters. And even at that stage, though, I was still sceptical. I have to admit, what I expected to find at the end of the rabbit hole was a secret US black military program that was building conventional advancements in aerospace technology. I figured it was a good story to blow all this UFO baloney out of the water. I was going into it with the full expectation it was complete nonsense. I started getting letters back, to my amazement, quite quickly, and a few of those who responded early on very sternly told me never to call them or write them ever again, which was quite instructive because I then realised who they were and where they were, and I started intensifying my focus on those particular institutions. A lot of other people were very chatty. Some told me to talk to friends of theirs, and I soon built up, quite frankly, an enormous database of names. And the important thing, and I think this made a difference, was that I left no electronic trail, because the worst thing you can do as a journalist is burn a source. It kills you. Nobody will ever trust you again. Early on, I was astonished, absolutely astonished to see in my reading just how much evidence there is in public records in plain sight to show that very senior military commanders very early after the Second World War clearly concluded that the phenomenon behind UFOs was intelligently controlled craft. In fact, They were seen to be, quote, evasive when sighted by friendly aircraft. I'm citing here the quite extraordinary Twining memo of September 1947, in which Lieutenant General Nathan Twining, the head of the US Army Air Force Air Material Command, acknowledged the flying discs being seen by many witnesses in US skies at the time were, quote, something real and not visionary or fictitious. And the general reported that the way these objects behaved clearly indicated that they were controlled, either manually, automatically, or remotely. And his memo records objects, perhaps craft, that multiple witnesses saw as metallic, elliptical in shape, flat on the bottom with a dome on top, classic flying saucers, confirmed by a commanding general. I was also struck by how blatantly an active official deception operation on UAPs was admitted in the declassified military and intelligence archives. It's not well understood that the dismissive debunking strategy towards UAP sightings by the US Department of Defense is part of an official policy developed 70 years ago by the CIA's so-called Robertson Panel. This extraordinary decision was made in secret by a group of scientists, military officers and spies that public interest in UFOs, what we call today UAPs, should be debunked and discredited. And a secret report was prepared for the CIA recommending a mass media campaign that would strip UFOs of their so-called aura of mystery. The report said, and I quote, and it's an astonishing quote, the debunking aim would result in reduction in public interest in flying saucers, which today evoke a strong psychological reaction. This education could be accomplished by mass media such as television, motion pictures, and popular articles. Basis of such education would be actual case histories, which had been puzzling at first but later explained. As in the case of conjuring tricks, there is much less stimulation if the secret is known. Such a program should tend to reduce the gullibility of the public and consequently their susceptibility to clever, hostile propaganda. Now, obviously, the official explanation for why the CIA talked explicitly about tricking the American public is this idea that all of this public reporting of UFOs was causing a huge drain on the Air Force's time because they were having to investigate them. And so they were arguing that we should suppress this in the public interest because it was making a national security threat, because then they wouldn't be able to focus on the real UFOs. But to me, that's a completely nonsensical argument, because if you think about it, you want your public to be alert and alarmed. You want them to report any kind of anomalous phenomena. Why would the Air Force be interested in discouraging people in that era from reporting alarming sightings of objects in our skies that could very well have been a foreign adversary aircraft? Also, should one bother to actually read it, the Robertson Panel report admits that one scientist on the panel resolved that an extraterrestrial explanation was the only possible explanation for many of the cases, and he was overruled by the rest of the panel. The Robertson Panel was frankly a fix. It was a deliberate deception to suppress public interest into UAPs, and it began the current contemporary attitude of stigma, ridicule and contempt for coverage of the subject. We've all been hoodwinked. There are other red flags there in the historical declassified archives pointing to the idea that agencies within the US government were and still are trying to obfuscate and manipulate public opinion to play down the UAP mystery.
We're looking at you,
After
Reddit.
General Nathan Twining had recommended a study of UAPs, Project Saucer, later Project Sign, the first of the US Air Force investigations was established in December 1947. And that official report, released a year later, declared that these objects were not extraterrestrial. It didn't provide a jot of evidence to support such a claim, and it suggested, without this evidence, that they were possibly of Soviet origin. But then, of course, there was the intriguing testimony of US Air Force officer Edward Ruppelt, who Micah talked about. He'd seen a secret Project Sign report, and he blew the whistle on it. Estimate of the situation, which had declared secretly that these objects were interplanetary craft. There's a whiff here of a cover-up. Declassified FBI files also show that J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, was briefed in 1950 about reports of 50-foot wide crashed flying saucers and small humanoid bodies being recovered from the New Mexico desert. And unfortunately for the FBI, this UFO memo was written up by an officer, an agent called Guy Hotel, and it's become the most requested item in the FBI files. The FBI's at pains over the years to say that Hotel's memos allegations were never corroborated. There was never any finding that it was all true. But it soon becomes clear that the many compelling witness reports that provided the basis for these claims, from purported crashes at Roswell, Aztec, New Mexico, and Kingsman, Arizona, they cannot be quickly discounted. Time and time again, witnesses reported being threatened, even told they would be murdered if they talked about this. Why? What was being covered up? Even the Air Force couldn't explain the McMinnville case in 1950, when a guy called Paul Trent and his wife photographed a classic flying saucer-shaped object. And the Air Force tied itself up in knots trying to find an explanation, and they couldn't find one. And so they wrote in a memo, this is one of the few UFO cases in which all factors investigated appear to be consistent with the assertion that an extraordinary flying object, silvery, metallic, disc-shaped, tens of metres in diameter, evidently artificial, flew within sight of two witnesses. And then there was Canadian scientist Wilbert Smith. I love this story, who managed to find people with apparent knowledge of the US secret program, including Robert Sabaka, a US scientist who'd worked for the US government's World War II Office of Scientific Research and Development, an eminent US scientist. And Smith declared in his once secret memo to the Canadian government not only that flying saucers exist, but this was the most highly classified subject in the US government, rating even higher than the H-bomb. He even outed Dr. Vannevar Bush as the head of the group running this secret program.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, because your flying disc is your delivery system for the H-bomb or whatever your next super weapon is. If you can travel 30,000 miles in less than a second, you could just freaking email the nuclear weapons all around the world and zap, it's over. Or some other kind of weapon. I don't know.
And it makes sense because Bush was the presidential scientific advisor, the very, very first during the Manhattan Project. And it's significant that neither the Canadian nor the US government have ever made any attempt to rebut Wilbert Smith's allegations. And moreover, before his death, Robert Sabaka, the US scientist who'd helped Wilbert Smith's investigations, actually admitted in a letter that he knew about the recoveries, note the plural, of flying saucer craft. And he described the extremely light and very tough materials that were recovered. He even talked about aliens that he said looked very like insects. And in his candid letter, he expressed his regret that this issue had been so highly classified and why the existence of these devices was so aggressively denied. It's going to be very interesting to see what the Canadian government's Sky Canada project, its report into more recent allegations of Canadian scientific collusion with the secret US UAP program finds when it's released later this year. I'm not holding my breath. What I should say is it's been suggested to me that I should investigate certain named Canadian scientists who've been working, I'm told, with the US government on retrieved non-human technology. And it's a secret that's being kept by faceless bureaucrats from the Canadian Prime Minister and the Defence Minister. I sure hope they're not going to try and cover that one up, because it's not going to go well. The official
Ooh.
public line for 70 years has largely been that there's been nothing to this UFO nonsense. It's a line, sadly, pushed today by yapping, incurious lapdogs in the mainstream press.
Shots fired.
Recently, there's been a series of reports on UAPs, drones, if you believe the US Air Force. That's the new swamp gas. They're being routinely seen hovering with apparent impunity over nuclear and military installations, and I was surprised to see in the declassified historical archives considerable evidence showing there was grave concern about these exact same objects appearing in the 40s and the 50s over extremely sensitive US national security installations such as Los Alamos and Oak Ridge, where America was making the bomb. Scientists and military working there were seeing these objects frequently, and Air Force investigators admitted, quote, "Here we run out of even blue yonder explanations that might be tenable, and we're left with numbers of incredible reports from credible observers." Something is monitoring our most secure national security installations. That's a scientific fact right now, as the US Air Force's own paperwork shows, and it's been going on for 7 decades.
Okay. I'm sorry, but I don't know who can. How do you not feel uncomfortable about that? I know there are people like Dr. Greer and others who say there's no possible way that these beings represent a threat. I don't buy it. I don't know how anybody could say that with certainty about an unknown number of non-human intelligences from God knows where, doing God knows what, but we just know that they're constantly around all of our nuclear weapons and all of our nuclear facilities. It doesn't make me feel that much more comfortable. And I don't think that if they wanted to do something, they would have done it by now is a good enough answer for this concern. And I think it's right, and I think it's okay to express a little bit of cautious concern over this issue. I know that there's a big divide in the community about, are they good? Are they bad? Are they here to help? Are they here to harm us? I don't know, but neither does anybody else. And so if someone's telling you you have nothing to fear, everybody should just relax and sit back, I don't know if I buy that. I really don't. It doesn't, something about it just doesn't feel right. And in any other scenario, if someone broke into your house and was standing next to your gun cabinet, say you're a gun owner, and they're just hanging out and they're not touching it, they're not reaching for your guns, but they're just standing next to that every day for years. Like, how long would it take you to feel weird about that? What if a stranger came into your house and just stood in your kitchen next to all your chef's knives? How long would it take for you to feel a little weird about that? Does something horrifying necessarily have to happen in order for us to feel weird about this presence? I think this is a big issue, and I don't think it gets nearly enough attention. I think it should get a lot more attention, and I don't feel weird talking about it, so I don't care if you don't agree.
Why is it not recognised as way strange that the US Air Force today reluctantly admits a worrying pattern of ongoing UAP sightings over key US Air Force bases and nuclear installation sites, which are a clear and present national security risk, and yet it cannot it hasn't provided a shred of evidence to back up its weak claim that these are somehow drones from a supposed foreign adversary government.
And even if they are drones from a supposed adversary government, according to Ross, or as Ross put it, even if they are drones, let's just assume that let's buy their excuse. These are drones. They're not UAPs. They're just drones. Well, why the fuck are so many goddamn drones over all of our nuclear assets? Like, reach into that 2.3 whatever trillion dollars that you can't account for and find some bucks and put some more guys on this, because like whoever's in charge is clearly not doing a good job. Something's not right. So the excuse that they're giving it's not a good look, even if it is what they say it is. It's a terrible look. Somebody needs to be fired.
Drones that have been seen to hover in the air against the wind at extraordinarily high altitude for days at a time in remote oceans hundreds of miles offshore, miraculously avoiding capture by the most powerful military on the planet, that I remind people has spent tens of millions of dollars on developing anti-drone technology. For that matter, why is so much of what the government knows about the supposed balloon shoot-downs over the continental USA last year still so highly classified, especially that Alaska object, which I do believe was anomalous?
Didn't they say they lost all the wreckage of the Alaska thing in the water? Like the water was too rough, they couldn't get in there and recover anything, and it all just mysteriously vanished beneath the waves because the weather was just so awful.
Another sound reason to take this issue seriously is to look at the calibre of the former government officials who were coming out 70 years ago pushing for UAP transparency and suggesting that the government was hiding something. Carl Nell, Lou Elizondo and David Grush have illustrious predecessors. The founder of NICAP, the US National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, was Thomas Townsend Brown, the chap I mentioned earlier.
Electrogravitics
the founding director of the CIA, this is the one I love, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, a hugely experienced naval intelligence officer, a former commander of the USS Missouri. Within a year of leaving his CIA job, what does he do? He becomes a UAP transparency advocate. And then he was also joined by a top US Navy Rear Admiral, Delmer Farney. Why are they doing that? Why did Hillenkotter in 1960 become a UAP transparency and testify to Congress, quote, "It is time for the truth to be brought out in congressional hearings"? This is a former DCI. What truth did Admiral Hillenkotter know in 1960 from his time in naval intelligence and as the head of the CIA?
Now, I want to just take a second and add to what I said a minute ago. I am fully open to, and in fact, I hope that this all turns out to be something really positive for humankind. My hope is that one of the reasons why Roscoe Hillenkotter and Brown and others pushed so strongly for disclosure at this particular time in history is because maybe what they know is that the non-human intelligence we're dealing with is genuinely interested in our safety and well-being, and that if people broadly knew and became aware of the fact that they were there and they're just waiting for us to put away our nuclear toys, then we would globally demand universal disarmament. And if that is the real reason for trying to get the information out, then it would make perfect sense that the military-industrial complex, which had just been built for decades on the back of the nuclear weapons program in the Cold War, would want to naturally resist that. So I'm fully open to the potential positive outcome of all this. I'm just saying that until somebody can show me some receipts, I don't know what to think, and I think caution is better than just blindly being open to whatever happens. I don't feel like that's the best move. Like, trust and verify, and then we can all take a step back and relax.
The parallels today with that, with David Grush, an exemplary intelligence officer entrusted with the highest presidential secrets, are extraordinary. While on NICAP's board, Hillenkotter and Rear Admiral Farney also publicly criticised the fact that many witnesses had stopped reporting their sightings to the US Air Force because of frustration that their investigations went nowhere. And does that sound familiar? Of course it does, because it's exactly what the ARRO is doing today, the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. I mean, it's a ridiculous name. There's also something that was done back then as well. When NICAP started attacking the US Air Force started attacking NICAP to try and discredit them. Sound familiar? Yet again, it's exactly what the Pentagon's been doing to Lou Elizondo and David Grush, trying to discredit them with sly, malicious and deceitful leaks to selected tame media. Just like Grush and co., former CIA Director Hillenkotter did his homework. He got hold of a leaked memo showing that while the Air Force was publicly debunking UAP sightings, in secret it was prioritising the monitoring of UAPs. Why was a supposedly fictitious phenomenon being secretly acknowledged in a memo as serious Air Force business? The simple fact is there's a hefty weight of declassified government files that prove the bleeding obvious that sections of the US military and intelligence community know a hell of a lot more than they're letting on. My favourites are the discoveries in cables from, for example, the US Air Force attaché in Kabul, Afghanistan, reporting the discovery of a physical flying saucer 15 metres in circumference with thick, small glass windows. That doesn't sound like a satellite or space debris. And apparently the Russians beat the Americans to it. We don't know what happened to that object.
Glass windows is really interesting. That would be a very weird one to see. I would almost be more weirded out to see glass on a UFO than anything else. Or you just wouldn't expect to see it. You would think that whatever their technology level is, it's beyond glass. Like even in Star Trek, they had transparent aluminum, but some kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just a reverse engineered piece of technology from another country. But still, that's an interesting case. I hadn't heard
There's
that
also
before.
a heavily redacted CIA memo from 1968 describing a metallic disc-shaped object with a 6-foot base, 4 feet in height, that was found in a crater in Nepal. This is one of a series of documents that refers to a covert program known as Project Moondust, which it's long been suspected was involved in retrievals not only of foreign adversary technology, but also of non-human craft. And interestingly, in light of the fact that David Grush acknowledged last year that there is an ongoing secret Cold War underway with our potential foreign adversaries over retrieved technology, the files suggest this isn't something new. And this is where things started to get interesting for me journalistically, because my first breakthrough in the program was actually an Australian...
What if it's... Hold up. There's an episode of Star Trek, the original series, where Kirk and the Enterprise come to a planet that is inhabited by 2 warring factions, and he has to make the decision to arm one side or the other. And it's basically this whole episode about the nuclear arms race and mutually assured destruction. And in the episode, I think at the end, if I remember correctly, they decide to arm both sides. And I wonder if that's what happened. I wonder if the Russians were gifted the same technology that the Chinese and the Americans were gifted, if that's what actually happened. Some people have claimed that this technology was just gifted to us, and then we were like in a race to reverse engineer it. But if it was gifted to everybody at the same time, or different types of technology gifted at different times, but basically to like even the playing field, maybe the play is to try and trick us or manipulate us into getting to a situation where we have to cooperate to solve the reverse engineering puzzle. And to cooperate would mean some kind of unification, peaceful, hopefully peaceful unification, in order to get our hands on the advanced technology secrets. Just spitballing.
Alleged linked UAP retrieval. Details from an Australian Air Force photographer who some decades back was summoned by his commanding officer in Darwin and told he would be helping the Americans out with an unspecified overseas photography job. I've never spoken about this before, and I've got to be careful to protect my ongoing inquiries. This military photographer, though, was told that the job was very secret, and it was obvious the Australian commander had no idea what he was being asked to do. It was totally need to know. And strange as this request by a foreign military like America may sound, This is how Australia does things. We've been very much a servile, willing supplicant to American intelligence and British intelligence for many, many years. And
Who
a
does
lot of the people I
number
know
two
inside
work
Australian
for?
intelligence are rightly quite proud of some of the things we've done to help defend Western democracy. But we've also done some stupid things. And one of the things I covered and reported for Australian TV in 1994 was a huge expose about our secret service, ASIS, the equivalent of the CIA. And ASIS had people who did technical bugging and tapping. We were very good at it, and we still are. And the Brits asked if they could borrow one of our chaps. And without asking what it was for, only too happy to please, our government's intelligence service said yes, and they sent him off. It was the aftermath of the 2003 Gulf War, and the Kuwaiti government was putting out huge contracts for the rebuilding of Kuwait. And what I learned from one of these technical operations guys was that he had bugged the Kuwaiti government officers for MI6, the British SIS, so that the British could win commercial contracts, against the Australians. But it had been kept secret. And so when I finally broke the story, it emerged that neither the Defence Minister nor even the head of the Secret Service knew that their staff were being loaned out this way. And this is how plausibly deniable things have been done by America and by the UK for many years. And it's been an area of research for me as a journalist for a long time. And so I am about to tell you about an alleged Australian involvement in what I suspect was a non-human craft retrieval. Because what this Australian military photographer said he was tasked to do was he was picked up by an American Air Force plane in Darwin, flown to a remote southeast jungle location, driven into a deep part of the jungle, and as he described it, there in the jungle was a disc-shaped craft. Under intense supervision, he was told to photograph everything about it, inside and out. He was then told to develop the negatives in front of his American supervisors. He then had to hand over the photographic gear and the camera and the film and make sure that he wasn't taking any with him. He was then warned not to discuss with Australian superiors what he'd done and what he'd seen, and he never did. I was the first person that learned about what had happened. As far as I know, the Australian government has no idea that this Australian serviceman was involved in a retrieval operation.
But how do we know that the disc that he photographed was actually non-human in origin? One. And two, how do we know that whatever he photographed wasn't put there for deliberately the purpose of planting a story like this, knowing that it might leak to certain people so that you could influence the conversation? This whole thing could be fake. And that's the thing. That's the problem, is the techniques are so sophisticated and there's so many layers of deception that you find yourself chasing your own tail at times because you just don't know. I'm assuming Ross has looked into this much more deeply, but I'm just armchair quarterbacking this speech. But I mean, look at what Richard Doty did. They will do crazy things.
And the interesting thing was, when I first spoke, even tangentially about this incident, I got phone calls from people I knew in Special Forces in Australia saying I should speak to certain people. And I was introduced to Australian Special Forces soldiers who'd been on secondment to the British SAS in Hereford. And one of them told me he'd been involved in a retrieval in a European country of a craft. There are shocking allegations. If I was to accept what these alleged first-hand witnesses were telling me, there was, and still is, a secret Cold War going on between the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans to secure what I am told and I have no way of definitively proving this. This is data. It's the start of an investigation. What I am told are retrieved non-human craft. There are even allegations that we are bringing down these craft offensively, using weapons. And I know that sounds crazy. I'm telling you what I am being told. If these claims are true, then we have acted reprehensibly with a non-human intelligence.
Maybe, maybe not. If we can bring them down, we have to know a little bit more about why we're bringing them down to understand whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. As a general rule of thumb, I would feel much more comfortable if our Earth military forces had the capability of shooting down anything that we find threatening in any serious way. That would help me sleep a little bit better at night. Now, maybe I'm just not as evolved as some others, but I'm still on the trial period for a lot of this stuff, and I'm taking it on faith from a lot of people that there's nothing to worry about and we're going to be fine. But I do have a lot of questions, and I don't think it's a bad idea to have some aces up our sleeve just in case. You never know. Catch a lot more flies with honey than vinegar, but you kill more flies with vinegar, and that's, it's important if it's flies we're talking about.
Our avaricious effort to be the first to secure an advantage with their technology. It's a moral stain on what should be one of the greatest moments in human history, first contact. I can well imagine, and I say if these allegations are true, I can well imagine this awful secret is one that some in government have decided it is best to stay concealed. Now, I know what many of you are probably thinking. This is sci-fi nonsense.
And before we go on, First Contact would be fantastic if it's like the movie First Contact and Vulcans show up and come off the ship and shake hands and then hang out and we listen to the jukebox and put on some Roy Orbison tunes and dance the night away. First Contact could be glorious depending on who we're being contacted by. But may I remind you that in Earth's own history, you don't have to look far to find examples of first contact between more advanced and less advanced cultures, and see how spectacularly badly it went for the less advanced culture. It's clear that we've had a poor history of contact between our own peoples here on Earth, and it's very unclear that just because a civilization is much more advanced than us, that would automatically translate into higher morality. It's very unclear. I don't know of anyone who's been able to make that case convincingly, at least not to me, just across the board. We don't know what we're dealing with. Gary Busey said it in Predator 2, and Schwarzenegger said it in Predator 1. If it bleeds, we can kill it. It's important to know where we stand in the pecking order, and it's important to know how much latitude we have just in case we need it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think it's suspicious whenever somebody pushes back really, really strongly and fiercely against that line of reasoning, because I have yet to hear that line of reasoning be disarmed in any meaningful way. Now, I stand ready to be corrected, and I'm open to engaging with anybody who wants to have that conversation. But right now, where we're at with the information that we have, I think it's better to be cautious. Just my 2 cents.
Silly stories peddled by attention-seeking Walter Mitty's to a credulous and gullible journalist. That's what I thought. I was sceptical. I still don't know whether to believe it. I do fear I'm being fed disinformation, but I've heard now the same story from so many sources, I'm beginning to think it might plausibly have some truth to it.
It does.
Then around this time in my research, a flood of letters started happening. It was first a trickle, then a flood. It took months for people to respond to my 160 plus letters. But after what I suspect was an agonisingly difficult decision for them to decide whether to engage, they did. And I began speaking to some extraordinarily clever, and I say this on their behalf, patriotic people. People who love their country, love and respect their constitution, honour their national security oath, but think you've got a bloody right to know about what they know. And I'm angry on their behalf. I will die in a ditch if need be, I'd rather not, to protect the anonymity of the sources I spoke to and am still engaging with. But one of them I can name, because he authorised me to. He called me on an open line out of the blue, and I could barely believe who he was. Because if I was to think of the one person who I wanted to speak to me, it was him. His name was Nat Kobitz. He was the US Navy's former long-time Director of Science and Technology Development, their chief R&D scientist, their chief geek for many years, for over 30 years. He was a beautiful, wisecracking, 92-year-old Brooklyn Jewish scientist with a beautiful sense of humour. And sadly, when I caught up with him, he was dying from cancer. And fate dictated that I caught him at the perfect time. He was sitting in his Baltimore home, bored out of his brain, with too much time on his hands. And here was this Aussie journalist asking him about the work that he'd done as part of the greatest generation with the US Navy's R&D division. He was fiercely proud of what he achieved, and so he should be. And over several months, he finally opened up to me about what he was, on his own admission, read into. He was briefed on the program. And he told me that he had been read into a classified program involving retrieved, non-human technology, recovered alien spacecraft. He eventually admitted that he was officially briefed that America had retrieved multiple non-human craft, and that he was aware there was a secret operation underway for decades, in his words, to undertake to reverse engineer them. He admitted that most of what he knew was effectively hearsay, although from some excellent official sources. This is something he'd been briefed into in his official capacity. He did admit that on one occasion he was flown to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, literally taken deep underground, taken to a secure room and shown what looked like some kind of bulkhead from a craft which he believed was constructed in a way that defied conventional explanation. The craft's skin and inner bulkhead were composites bonded at an atomic level. He suspected it was non-human intelligence technology. But being the scientist he was, infuriatingly, he wouldn't say to me it was alien tech. He would just say it was something he had never seen that any human could make. Nat was a patriot. He was a decent, honourable public servant. He respected the fact that this program was being kept secret for a reason. But as a scientist, he also recognised that the American public, and especially Congress, had the right to know what was being done with taxpayer dollars. And he frankly told me that as far as he knew, there was no good justification for keeping it secret. So he never told me why he'd actually done this. But shortly after he passed from cancer in 2020, I started getting messages and calls. And it turned out he'd basically told people to get in touch with me. I found it very, very difficult to accept a lot of what they told me. I still do. I find it mind-blowing that I'm in this position as a serious insect journalist who's spent his career investigating crime and corruption, that I'm on the edge of what is the most fringe subject in the world. But every single one of these people that Nat put me onto was talking about one thing: the program. A highly secret, very, very, very carefully compartmentalised retrieval effort of non-human technology craft, and an identically highly protected reverse engineering program being conducted in secret facilities across the United States. Retrieval teams rigidly compartmented, operations absolutely need to know, mind-boggling secrecy. Multiple sources have told me that there was a very clear threat made: if you talk about this, you will be killed. And there are allegations. David Grush has made them as well. I have been told by multiple people that people have been murdered to protect this secret. Make of that what you will. As we all know, politicians, scientists, intelligence community and military whistleblowers are now openly accusing the US government of a massive, decades-long cover-up. They're suggesting the world has been egregiously misled in a deliberate disinformation campaign designed to suppress interest in a phenomenon that, contrary to its public position, the US has always, in fact, taken very seriously indeed. And throughout 2023, as we all know, there's been a determined effort by a bipartisan group of very senior US politicians to try and get legislation through the Congress to force transparency and disclosure provisions into America's annual defence budget. And what finally passed into law mandated some of what might help a government-wide UAP records collection to be held by the US National Archives. But I don't expect for a moment that the agencies allegedly responsible for this massive cover-up are going to willingly hand over what they see as the crown jewels to temporary employees.
The longer this process goes on, the more I become convinced that the faction that's pushing for open disclosure is at least partly motivated by the tremendous amount of money that can be made by commercializing these technologies in an open format, in an open market. And instead of having them locked up behind closed doors and classified programs, if you were able to commercialize just a small fraction of some of these, just maybe the materials, maybe that gives us the path directly to much more efficient ways of achieving fusion, superconductors, certain things that we have an absolute need for at this particular moment, at the dawn of a new space race, as corporate entities start pushing out the boundaries of human exploration into our own solar system. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars stand to be made on the backs of whoever can commercialize this technology. So I suspect that somewhere within the many motivations that the people working in favor of disclosure may have, that a lot of that is fueled by just the knowledge of how much money there is to be made by commercializing some of this stuff. And that might have something to do with why Carl Nell is courting Wall Street investors recently. I think there's more to it than they just paid his speaking fee. I think there's more going on in the background. Just to spitball in here.
That's the dilemma you face. It's not my problem. I'm not an American. It's up to you what you do about it. But I'm told this was hidden long ago in private corporate aerospace, in full anticipation that the day would come when Congress would start asking questions. A key provision in the bill that was proposed last year would have mandated eminent domain, the confiscation of UAP-related material. And it was struck down. But the mere fact that senior politicians like Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, one of the most powerful people in the Congress, was prepared to put his name to a document in the Congress talking about the retrieval of non-human intelligence technology. We've passed a tipping point.
We've crossed the Rubicon. I also think that there's a chance, this is just a guess, another speculation, that the eminent domain clause that was put into the Schumer amendment was floated out there as not a decoy, but kind of like a decoy, knowing that that would be a red line. It would flush out the agencies and the people responsible into the open from the shadows to force them to strike it down publicly. It was a move. Maybe this is just a strategic an assessment of what could have happened, a hypothetical here. I don't know this to be true. But you put an eminent domain clause in the Schumer amendment, you float it through, and at some point, these agencies are going to either have to let it pass, in which case you get what you want, or they have to come out and strike it down. And so that's what happened. And now we know, as Lou Elizondo said kind of right after that happened, he said, now we know where the incoming fire is coming from. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing. But I've heard that from a few different people now, and I'm starting to think there might be some kind of a there. That it wasn't necessarily expected to ever pass in that form.
Very, very unusual about this push
that wasn't
Congress
the point.
For this greater UAP disclosure on an issue that many people still regard as a fantasy is that it is backed by many high-powered politicians, among them the Democrat Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Republican Vice Chairman of the Senate Select Committee Marco Rubio, the Republican Senator Mike Rounds, the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity for the Armed Services Committee, and the Democrat Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who serves on the Senate committees for both intelligence and armed services. A previous highly respected Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, the late Harry Reid, also played a huge role in pushing Congress to make these laws and to begin aggressively investigating what the government knows about UAPs. Why would two Senate Majority Leaders, members of the so-called Gang of Eight, which is the one group in the Congress that is briefed into all of America's most deep secrets, why would they put their reputations on the line to promote disclosure of a supposedly non-existent, non-human intelligence and technology operating secretly on our planet? Politicians do not put their names to bills unless they have very good grounds for doing so. And there are also lower house politicians pushing for public congressional hearings into UAPs, just as happened in the 1970s Watergate and Church Committee hearings, where whistleblowers would get their chance to testify under oath. And after the Pentagon's UAP Investigation Office, ARRO, issued a report in February categorically denying the existence of illicit UAP efforts with retrieved extraterrestrial technology, Senator Gillibrand pledged that she wanted public hearings. She said it's definitely not case closed. Her comments and those of other politicians suggest Congress suggests something is being concealed on UAPs, and it's now determined to investigate. There are extraordinary allegations that have been aired. As we all know, in June 2023, almost a year ago, David Grush went public with his allegations. He basically alleged on both the debrief and also on News Nation with me that the US is running a secretive UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program, and that it is in possession of non-human technology, including craft, along with their dead pilots, biologics, yes, aliens. That's David Grush's allegations. And he filed in 2022 a whistleblower complaint with the US Intelligence Community Inspector General. And this has been so misrepresented categorically, the US Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, he's the US Intelligence Community Inspector General. He deemed all of David Grush's allegations, including his allegations of a retrieval and reverse engineering program, as urgent and credible. There's been an attempt to suggest that it was just in relation to his allegations of reprisals. That's not true. The Inspector General of Intelligence specifically found that it was an urgent and credible issue for investigation by the Congress, credible, that David Grush had made an allegation of a secret retrieval and reverse engineering program. Think about that. That investigation's still ongoing. David also gave hours of classified testimony. And in a secure room for the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, he named names. He gave locations. He's given Congress the names of he knows who are the gatekeepers. And he's made it very, very clear that he's detailed everything about what he knows about the program. He specifically gave evidence under oath. Under oath, so he risks criminal prosecution if he's lied, detailing his allegations to the House of Congress Oversight Committee, explaining that his allegations were based on information he'd been given with individuals with a long-standing track record of legitimacy and service to their country, many of whom shared compelling evidence in the form of photography, official documentation, and classified oral testimony. Weigh that well. He also explained how he was tasked by the UAPTF director to identify all the special access programs and controlled access programs, the secret folders around which the secret has been kept, related to UAPs. And he said, I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program to which I was denied access to those additional read-ons. He also alleged that the programs he uncovered were operating in breach of oversight rules that mandated Congress must be informed about all such secret programs. The US Defense Department has conspicuously not commented at all about Mr. Grush or his specific allegations. They've used AARO, the Pentagon's congressionally mandated UFO investigation office, but AARO is only as good as the information that it's given and whether its leadership mandates a proper investigation. My impressions to date suggest that most witnesses with direct knowledge of the legacy retrieval and reverse engineering program wouldn't go within cooee of AARO, as we say in Australia. They just don't trust the Pentagon to investigate its own dirty secrets, which led to AARO declaring in a report earlier this year that it hasn't found any empirical evidence that any sighting of the UAP represented off-world technology or the existence of a classified program that had not been properly reported to Congress. It also went on to say that investigative efforts determined that most sightings were the result of misidentification of ordinary objects and phenomena. And then there was this line, which I just think is incredible. Although many UAP reports remain unsolved, AARO assesses that if additional quality data were available, most of these cases also could be identified and resolved as ordinary objects or phenomena. What sophistry! AARO is suggesting that it's able to declare on its own admission it has no evidence to back such a claim, but it's asserting that most of these other unsolved cases would be capable of prosaic explanation. I'm sorry, but such a contention is unscientific and it displays a lack of objectivity. How can you reach any conclusion until the empirical data has been collected and assessed? It's an express admission that Arrow was prejudging the assessment. The report, frankly, was a total joke, and I know some Arrow staff are extremely embarrassed by its findings. Commentators have since criticised the report, including senior politicians in Congress, because Arrow, the Pentagon, did not do a proper investigation into the allegations raised by David Grush and many other witnesses who've testified to the Congress in secret. And conspicuously, this is so important, there has been no specific public response to David Grush's allegations from the independent Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI. That's the independent intelligence czar that, since the catastrophic intelligence failures of 9/11, oversees and coordinates all US intelligence agencies. In fact, its annual report in 2022 appears to directly contradict Arrow because it made the finding that UAP events continue to occur in restricted or sensitive airspace, highlighting possible concerns for safety of flight or adversary collection activity. It also said UAP pose a safety of flight and collision hazard to air assets, potentially requiring aircraft operators to adjust flight patterns in response to their unauthorised presence in the airspace, operating outside of air traffic control instructions and standards. And it also said UAP continue to represent a hazard to flight safety and pose a possible adversary collection threat. And then in December 2023, after Ohio Congressman Mike Turner led a push to block the key Schumer amendments that would have allowed whistleblowers to come forward and give evidence with more security to the Congress, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, no less, spoke on the floor of the Senate, clearly angry, and he confirmed that he believed the US government was refusing to share information on UAPs with the American people. Senator Schumer said, UAPs are of immense interest and curiosity to the American people, but with that curiosity comes the risk for confusion, misinformation and mistrust, especially if the government isn't prepared to be transparent. The United States government has gathered a great deal of information on UAPs over many decades, but has refused to share it with the American people. This is the Senate Majority Leader saying this. This is wrong and additionally breeds mistrust. And this is the kicker paragraph. We have also been notified by multiple credible sources that information on UAPs has been withheld from Congress, which, if true, is a violation of laws requiring full notification to the legislative branch, especially as it relates to the 4 congressional leaders, the Defence Committees and the Intelligence Committee. And in apparent defiance of the Pentagon Arrow's office to do its level best to downplay the UAP issue, the senior so-called J3 Intelligence Joint Chiefs staff advising America's Joint Chiefs of Staff are taking UAPs very seriously indeed. In an FOI Act request obtained by researcher Douglas Johnson, there are orders that were sent out to all US military commands in May 2023 that mandated the collection of all UAP data. It set out procedures for reporting and gathering data on contemporary military encounters with UAPs. And it reads, the US government has observed UAP in or near the territory and operating areas of the United States, of its allies and of its adversaries, and observing and identifying and potentially mitigating UAP has become a growing priority for US policymakers, lawmakers and war fighters. The potentially ubiquitous presence of UAP defines the national security implications of those anomalies. which range from operational hazards and threats to technological and intelligence surprise to adversaries' strategic miscalculations. It is imperative that DoD provide UAP incident, incursion and engagement for the Department's detection and mitigation of potential threats, exploitation of advanced technologies, and informing policymaker and warfighter decisions. That is not a Pentagon that is disinterested in UAPs. And the explicit reference to the national security implications of those anomalies in the Joint Chiefs document puts the Pentagon's most senior commanders in apparent conflict with the bullshit report from their own UAP investigation office. It's history repeating itself. While one arm of the Pentagon publicly dismisses UAPs, it's behind the scenes being acknowledged as a grave national security threat. Now, you're probably getting very sick of listening to me by now. I sure am. But before I finish, I want to tell you about an initiative that I'm involved in back in Australia. The Non-Human Intelligence Research Institute, NHIR.org. It's been founded with the extremely generous support of an Australian neuroscientist and businessman called Dr. Anton Uvarov. It's the first organisation of its kind in the Australasian region. We plan to fund collaborative scientific research projects into unidentified anomalous phenomena. And we are very interested in funding generously collaborations with scientists worldwide.
There it is. It was a recruitment video.
Dr. Beatrice Villarol, who I know is presenting at this conference, to assist her superb research into so-called astronomical transients. Another planned project is the construction of absolutely state-of-the-art observation stations that will be placed in UAP hotspots. These will be mobile, using absolutely best-case, top-of-the-line technology. We hope they will collect extensive data on UAP.
That's awesome. That's what I'm talking about. Bringing the research into the formal scientific sphere and collecting real, actual, hard data that's vetted and verified. That's awesome. That's what we need.
So if anyone here or anyone watching thinks they have a scientific project that might help us crack the mystery of UAPs, and you're interested in pitching for NHIR Institute's funding support, and I can tell you, Anton's deadly serious. He wants to support good science. Let's talk. We think it's time to stop waiting for governments to admit what they know. We plan to science the truth. There's a pile of my cards here. Don't hold back. Thank you very much.
Go, Ross.
I think you wanted questions, yeah.
Yeah, one more time, Ross Coulthart. What an incredible way to kick off the 2024 AAPC conference. Now, we're going to do a few questions. I think we've got just enough time, don't we? We're a little behind schedule, but hey, he had a lot to say, didn't he?
I'm so sorry if I wabbled on. Yeah.
Now, with the questions, I do want to quickly say, and I'll say a little more about this later, that we're all using the Whova app. Most of you probably got emails about this with updates. It's probably the best way for you to include your questions, but there are also little cards on the table where you can do it the old-fashioned way, like Ross would do, right? Write it down and put it in the mail. So indeed, and that's obviously very effective. So if you'd like to write on your cards and pass those up to the front, I think that Rich and some of the folks are going to be helping to get those up here to me. I'm going to start, though, on a few on the Whova app, and I'm going to give you a little briefing tomorrow morning, by the way, about how that works. For the time being, let's kick off with this one, Ross. We have the following question. It seems that most people active in the UAP arena have given up on challenging the mainstream media's wholesale shunning of the UAP topic. Do you believe it's a lost cause, or do you, and they emphasize this, do you honestly think mainstream media can be brought around to cover the topic appropriately?
You know what? I don't think mainstream media matters anymore. One of the things that I'm fascinated by as a journalist is I think I'm personally responsible for the decline of hot lead in newspapers, film in television. Every single thing that I've used to report in journalism has gradually gone defunct during my career. And of course, the real reason is because of the encroachment of the internet. What has happened is this incredible secret, and it is a secret, it is real, has been kept because at the very time that we need quality investigative journalism at a level we've never seen before, the money that used to provide rivers of gold to the great newspapers and the huge TV stations, it's not there anymore. And most of the media networks are they're sniffing vapours, they're running on empty. They don't have the huge investigative staff they used to have. When I first started in newspapers, I was one of probably 20 investigative reporters in my newspaper. And now I'm often the only reporter doing investigative journalism in an entire TV network. There's no money anymore. And so when you go to a boss and you say, as I did once, I want to go to the United States and talk to a guy called Chris Mellon, who tells me that there's a really interesting story about UFOs. Not only did I meet with hostility to the whole idea because of the embarrassment about the stigma of UFOs from the boss of the program I was working for, it was also cost. These things cost money. Most of the people I've persuaded to talk, I've only persuaded them to talk by sitting down and talking to them. The process of travel, the process of exposition, that takes work. And that great era of investigative journalism, where great papers like the New York Times, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, I mean, it's a beautiful period in American journalism, but it's over. And it's why you're not seeing a lot of good quality journalism anymore on a lot of issues in the American media or in my media. And so
Except on News Nation. Am I right?
I've given up lamenting the failure of mainstream media because it's not their fault. I've spoken to editors about this. A lot of my friends are now editors of major newspapers or TV networks, and they're pained by the fact that they don't have staff to deploy to go out and investigate stuff. But what is interesting, and I've learned this for myself, I put an interview up with Gary Nolan late last year, just as a filler. Channel 7 said to me in Australia, look, if you've got any interviews you think are interesting that people might want to watch and we can put it up over Christmas. It's been watched nearly 3 million times. The last time anyone in the media had ratings of 3 million was probably 40 years ago. What's happening is media is moving online, and online is incredibly powerful. It's much more powerful than mainstream media. I routinely, on podcasts that I do, or on shows that I do like Reality Check on News Nation, we outrate major networks on national television because there's an audience from all over the world that even if they're not getting it in mainstream media, they want it and they're interested. There's a wisdom of the crowd on this subject. They want to know what's going on and they smell a rat.
Indeed, well said. Here's another question. This comes, there we go. Yeah, we've got time for clapping. We've got a question that comes from here in the audience this evening. Ross, what does it mean for the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies' methodical approach to characterizing UAP, the slow, steady, and empirical approach, in other words, the scientific method, and how long it often takes to evaluate things scientifically if what Ross describes turns out to be true?
And I say if, I always concede there is the possibility that this is some incredible mass disinformation program, that the dozens of people I've now spoken to about this have been set up by, Office of OGA and the CIA or whoever. I doubt it. But what does it mean for science? What it means is we've just got to keep on digging. I mean, it's there. It really is. I mean, the incredible thing is I've had conversations with scientists in the program who are angry that they can't do what we're all doing here, sharing and discussing ideas, which is the fundamental idea behind good science, peer review. My understanding is that a large part of the technological breakthroughs that should have happened with this technology, if this is true, haven't been able to be achieved because, frankly, we haven't been able to share ideas with other scientists, particularly in materials science, who might be able to advise how things are constructed. I spoke to one guy.
God, that's what Stephen Greer's been saying since the get-go, right? Like since the jump, Greer has been on that bandwagon about the lost century of progress and the astonishing technology that we could have. I mean, imagine the type of society that we could live in if we had functional anti-gravity and unlimited energy. Maybe if we had achieved fusion 40 years ago, like what would that have meant for people like us here today? What kind of world would we be living in? Maybe we would have colonized Mars by now. It really does boggle the mind.
Who told me he'd worked for 20 years on one particular object, but it was so compartmented, he'd only ever been able to look at videos and photographs and descriptions of the object. He'd never been allowed to physically touch it. Think about that. And every year he would come to his office, sit in that office, and he wasn't allowed to talk to the people in either office, either side of him, and discuss what it was that he was working on, and neither were they. This whole program, if it exists, of course, is so heavily compartmented that it's constraining the discovery of scientific advancements that could benefit all of humanity, not just a select group of people in private aerospace who I suspect have made the decision that this is theirs.
Our next question here, we're getting quite a few about some of the recent amendments and the bill language that's appeared actually fairly recently. This one comes from folks online. What are the odds that Congressman Robert Garcia's proposed amendments to Majority Leader Schumer's UAP legislation will face significant revisions or get gutted again before it passes?
I think it will at the moment, because there is I don't know what it is. I mean, I love coming to America. I've come here pretty much every year, multiple times a year for the last 35 years. And I've seen a change. When I was a little boy, I loved the fact that there was this Apollo space program that had been achieved by this amazing country, America, that had made incredible technological achievements. And so much of it happened here in Rocket City. And I was very lucky. A good friend of mine organised a VIP tour for me of the Marshall Space Centre this week, and I went and stood by the test platform where Wernher von Braun tested his first rockets here in America. It was history, an incredible era where, you know, some of America's greatest generation achieved technological achievements that are just absolutely mind-boggling.
To be fair, a lot of people in that program were former Nazis, or were just Nazis that we brought over in Operation Paperclip. So it's like, it's cool to be patriotic about it, but like, let's be real about who these folks were. Not all of them, but
now, America
Wernher von
feels
Braun,
broken.
certainly.
It feels like it's lost its way. And it's really interesting, because what could single-handedly motivate America? You need like a Manhattan Project. Nothing could do it more than to be able, and this is what I find bewildering. I've asked so many people, including quite senior people, who've rung me, knowing that I will, obviously, even though they're telling me things that betray the fact that they know full well they're admitting the existence of a program. I've had conversations with people in private aerospace asking me what they should do. It's perverse. And I've said, what's the reason? Why are you keeping this secret? And they talk with just enough angularity, just enough detachment from any admission. But what they're skirting around is the fact that they're sitting on this monstrous secret. And to me, nothing could transform America more or humanity more than the realisation that we are not alone. You know, we'd perhaps forget our differences in Ukraine or North Korea or China or Russia and think of ourselves as humans. Imagine what science could achieve, what humanity could achieve if we could deploy the minds of everybody in this room and anybody in the world to achieve technological breakthroughs. My understanding is that what we're doing with this technology, with this retrieved technology, is we're essentially piggybacking on it. We're not reverse engineering it, we're retrofitting it in a way that allows us to use it. I won't go any further than that. I know a lot about it. And by the way, if anybody ever did decide to push me under a bus, believe me, every name of every person that I've been told, I haven't been able to verify it, so I can't publish it, everything I know will be published by multiple people who I've sent copies of what I have all around the world. I'm mindful of the fact that I do know people have been murdered, and that's
It's a good old dead man switch. Stephen Greer talks about that. He says he's got one too. He sent out copies of all his archives to various people, and they have instructions to publish it all and air the dirty laundry if he ever gets mysteriously suicided or steps in front of a bus or falls out of a hotel window or, I don't know, ingests some polonium or has a sudden unexplainable heart attack or aneurysm, or maybe just gets shot in a strange drive-by shooting, or I don't know, crashes his car because his brakes stop working, or falls off the side of a mountain, or takes a ride on a helicopter that doesn't do too well. A lot of things can happen, and it's kind of interesting to hear Ross say this as well. He's got a dead man switch to protect himself. I'm sure all these guys do. They must, right? Scary. Also, I think it was, I want to say it was in the Danny Sheehan interview I did a few months back. I think it was Danny Sheehan who said that one of the things that they're afraid of is that, as Ross just alluded to, that the discovery and acknowledgement and open contact with an advanced non-human intelligence would force humanity to accept that we have basically a single origin story. And as a species, we would have to think more like one global group of people, and it would erase our minor differences, or not erase, but I guess it would supersede all of those and force people to start thinking about themselves as human beings instead of Russian or Chinese or American. And that is the real psychological threat to this control group. That was a really interesting point. I think there's something to it.
big call, I know. People have been murdered to protect this secret. And so coming back to answer your question, this is the biggest secret in human history. And I don't give a toot whether people call me a conspiracy theorist. On a level of probability, I'm pretty bloody sure it's true.
Language, Ross. Come on.
And what they're doing is they're misusing the laws of your country to hinder what is a constitutional right by Congress to oversight every arm of government. Now, if Americans don't care about that, then you can go another 60 years in ignorance.
It's not that we don't care, Ross. It's that our Congress is bought and paid for. You know that. I mean, there's absolutely no connection between what Congress votes for and what people actually want. You can look at the polling data. It's so clear. They do whatever they want. They do what they're paid to do, and that's what they're doing. It's one of the other reasons why I think that if anything does finally get declassified and disclosed, it's going to be because there's even more money to be made from doing it, because I'm that jaded and cynical, I think.
It's up to you. I mean, frankly, I actually don't think the amendment will pass in its current form. I think it will be emasculated. And frankly, unless you, the American voter, can motivate politicians to actually do something about this, it's a complete waste of time. And just like Roscoe Hillenkotter tried in 1960 and was publicly vilified for doing so, a former DCI of the CIA went public within a year of leaving office, pushing for UAP transparency. What the hell? Why did he do that? He did that because he knew about the program. He thought it was monstrous, outrageous that this secret was being kept. And I do. But I don't vote. But I happen to think that America, the greatest generation, showed in this town 60 years ago things that me as a little boy, I loved it. It inspired me. You as a country can do great things.
This is the Braveheart speech.
And you've lost your way. It's as simple as that. This is an issue that goes to the absolute heart of what you've all been told, your country is great. That's a load of steaming bullshit right now. You're
Language.
Failing. And you're failing because there's this monstrous secret that's being perpetuated. Trillions of dollars, I suspect, have been diverted from your budgets. You can't even fix your roads.
That's true. He's right.
What the hell? Why don't you vote these pricks
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
out and get people in who are going to make a change?
Let's hear it for Ross, though. That's a good point. He's absolutely
We're almost
right.
out of time, but on the heels of that, I think it would only be appropriate to get one more from our live audience here at the Rocket City Tavern. This question, Ross, what actions can activists take to effectively pressure elected officials to demand more
Good question.
transparency?
It really is as simple as, I know there was the New Paradigm Institute, for example, held a demo in DC, and only a number of people turned up. Good old-fashioned tub-thumping political campaigning makes a huge difference. I can tell you, I've got friends that work in ministerial offices in government, and nothing works better than sitting down and handwriting a letter to a minister of government or a secretary of department complaining about something. If politicians started getting floods of letters telling them that this is an election issue,
Really?
I know, for example, Trump's
A
been
handwritten
briefed.
letter?
You know what's going on? He's scared. He's scared they're going to kill him if he reveals what he knows. That's what I've been told.
Wait, who? I just
Ministerial
talked over.
offices in government, and nothing works better than sitting down and handwriting a letter to a minister of government or a secretary of department complaining about something. If politicians started getting floods of letters telling them that this is an election issue, I know, for example, Trump's been briefed.
Oh, wow. They briefed Trump?
You know what's going on? He's scared. He's scared they're going to kill him if he reveals what he knows. That's what I've been told. You have a situation where your potential president is terrified of speaking about the UAP issue because he's scared they're going to knock him.
Well, wait a second. Didn't you just get through telling us about 45 minutes ago that they don't like briefing the president because he's a temporary employee? So why the fuck would they brief Trump? And sorry if you're a Trump person, I'm not, but this guy's a maniac. Like, he is known to be full of shit. There's no question about it. And he says crazy things and does completely unpredictable things all the time. Why would you tell him? I don't know why you'd tell Biden either. Honestly, that guy doesn't even know where he is half the time. But the truth is, like, it can't be both ways. They can't think the president is a temporary position and not worth informing the president and then inform one of the worst presidents ever. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And don't come at me with the Trump shit. I don't care.
I'm not kidding you. I'm not making this up. This is serious. You have a national scandal at the heart of this. It's not just about UFOs. It's about your country.
America runs on scandal.
It's totally screwed unless you resolve this issue. It should be the dominant political issue. If you can get this secret out, the world will change overnight.
That's
And
true.
I've heard that from people in the program. They're deeply, deeply angry that this secret is being suppressed. They see no good reason. One of the reasons it's being suppressed is because America has made weapons, dreadful weapons. Are you proud of that? Is that really what we want to do from technology that we've obtained by using offensive weaponry against a fairly benevolent, non-human intelligence?
Fairly benevolent. I don't know about that. Someone show me some receipts. Like, come on. Again, either we don't know anything or we know something. But if you know something, you got to come forward and tell us what you know. You can't say we don't know anything, but I happen to know they're okay and they're all right. And all we have to do is relax. It doesn't make any sense.
Is that really how we want to define our first contact? Because that's what we're talking about here. And I don't know how to communicate this more seriously. You know, I'm over talking about this as a possibility. You might notice in the course of my speech, I've used qualifications, if this is true. And I will always say that we have to concede the possibility that it's disinformation. But too many people have told me that this is true. And frankly, if Americans don't care about it when they go to the polls in November, you're screwed.
Okay, Ross, to be fair, there's a lot of things that we care about that we bring to the polls in November, every November that there's an election. And to be perfectly honest, they tell us to basically roll it up and shove it up our ass. I don't know if that's necessarily the best. Like, if that's our best hope, then there's no hope. I'm very cynical about that. We're going to have to do better than just vote on this.
Sorry.
I think that's actually all the time we have for tonight, but I do want to ask everyone, please, to give us another round of applause for Mr. Ross Coulthart.
Ended on kind of a lame note. There you have it. Ross Coulthart speaking before the, what was it? The Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies in Rocket City, Huntsville, Alabama, home of espionage from all over the world and tons of weird anti-gravity researchers that mysteriously disappear under strange circumstances. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Did I get it right? Am I off the mark? Did I miss something completely? Do you have thoughts that you want to share? Tell me in the comments. And hey, don't forget to like and share this video. And if you're not already a subscriber, please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to help me continue to make content for this channel. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being a part of Team Night Shift. I'll see you on the next one. Until then, keep looking up.